Hello and welcome to the 8th and final video in my Revolution Software retrospective. If you haven't watched any of my previous videos in this series, I suggest you do so before watching this one, especially the Broken Sword videos. Last time we talked about Broken Sword: The Angel of Death, which came out in 2006 and was not received well by fans of the series. I can see why. Although I personally thought that it was a decent adventure game, it definitely wasn't a good Broken Sword game. It felt nothing like the Broken Sword fans fell in love with, and was barely an improvement over the abysmal The Sleeping Dragon. And sadly, for the next 6 years, it seemed that this is how the series ends. However, all hope was not lost, as rumors of a new Broken Sword game started surfacing around 2011, and on August 23rd, the next game in the Broken Sword series was finally revealed. Broken Sword 5: The Serpent's Curse. This is it. This is the Broken Sword fans were waiting for. A true 2D adventure game that looks, feels, and plays exactly like the first two games we all adored. And the best part about it is that it was self-published by Revolution Software. No more publishers putting the team on tight budgets and unrealistic time restraints. No more publishers forcing the team to make a 3D title with action and platforming elements. This was going to be Revolution's baby, just like Shadow of the Templars was 16 years before, back when the publishers had zero creative control over the game. Of course, without publishers, the team needed the fans' help with funding, which is why they put up a Kickstarter campaign for the game asking for $400,000. Thankfully, not only was the game fully funded 12 days after the Kickstarter went up, but it also ended up getting more than twice the asking amount, thanks to both Kickstarter backers and PayPal donations. Needless to say, the game showed a lot of promise and received a lot of love from its fans. Although there were a few concerns, such as the characters being 3D models pre-rendered into 2D sprites, and the fact that the game was gonna be released in 2 episodes, the game looked promising enough that people didn't mind all of that. They were still very excited. And thankfully, it wasn't a PC exclusive like the last one, as the game was set to be released on PC, iOS devices, Android devices, and the PS Vita, for the 2 people who actually bought that thing. With future plans for the full retail version to be released on PS4, Nintendo Switch, and Xbox One. After a long wait and a few understandable delays, the first episode was finally released on December 4th, 2013, with the second episode coming out 4 months later. So how was it? Was it truly the return to form the fans were hoping for? Or did it bank too much on nostalgia? Did we finally get a proper Broken Sword sequel? Or did it still fail to capture what made the first 2 games so good? To answer these questions and more, let's dive right in. Spoiler warning. I'm gonna keep plot spoilers to a minimum, however I will be spoiling some puzzle solutions and some game locations. I might also spoil some minor plot points from the previous Broken Sword games, especially Broken Sword 1 and 2. If you haven't played these games, I suggest you do so before watching this video. To those who have already played them, or those who just don't care about spoilers, grab a drink, sit back, and enjoy the video. The game starts off in 1937 Catalonia, during the Spanish Civil War. A group of fascists force their way into this mansion, and a gunfight starts between them and the residents. This man, Xavier, gives his son a medallion, then tells him to go with his mother, and that he'll catch up. He takes a painting called La Malediccio, and makes a run for it, however is sadly shot dead by the invaders. After securing the area, a man in a suit comes in and takes the painting from the now deceased Xavier. Then we jump to present-day Paris, where the same painting is being showcased at an art gallery. George, who is now working in art insurance, runs into Nico at this gallery, and as they are starting their conversation, a man wearing a helmet barges in. He holds everyone at gunpoint, steals the painting, and shoots the art gallery owner as he was trying to stop him. Once again, George finds himself in the middle of a new mystery, and this is already starting to feel like Broken Sword. What starts off as an armed robbery and a murder mystery ends up being a story of adventure, lost treasure, ancient conspiracies, and a chance for George and Nico to once again save the world from certain doom. And I'm here for it. I loved the story of this game. Of all Broken Sword games, it felt closer to Broken Sword 1. Whilst not as good, it was definitely good enough to be a proper sequel. Not to mention, it was meant to be as much a zeitgeist starter as the first game was. See, prior to Broken Sword 1, the Knights Templar didn't have much of a presence in pop culture, as they do now. Whilst Broken Sword sadly doesn't get nearly as much credit for bringing the Templars into the public's eye, since most of the credit goes to an unnamed mediocre novel written by an unnamed mediocre writer, not pointing any fingers here, there's no denying that Shadow of the Templars was the first to try and popularize them. However, they are a bit of a tired concept nowadays, so Cecil wanted to try and bring something else into mainstream media. He was fascinated by the Gnostic Gospels, especially after reading about the Gnostic texts which were discovered in Egypt in 1945. And the game does a lot with this source material. It might not be as rich with historical info as Broken Sword 1 was, but it definitely taught me a lot about Catharism, the Dominican Church, and the Albigensian Crusade. Also, seeing how the game starts off during the Spanish Civil War, it taught me a lot about that too. It took some liberties here and there, but for the most part, it was quite accurate, and it definitely made me want to learn more. I couldn't help but feel the same feelings I was having back when I was a kid playing Broken Sword: The Shadow of the Templars for the first time. The subject was interesting, the way they told it was entertaining, and the game's reliance on La Malediccio reminded me a lot of the Templar manuscript. Overall, it was a very good plot, and I genuinely enjoyed it. That's not to say I didn't have any issues with the story, though. For starters, I feel like George and Nico meeting at the gallery was too much of a huge coincidence in a game that relies very little on coincidences. I just wish there was a more believable reason as to why they were both at the gallery. Seeing how they were still close friends at the end of Broken Sword 3, it would make total sense for George to call Nico and invite her to this gallery. It didn't have to be by chance. I also didn't like George's motivation in this game. In Broken Sword 1, he wanted to solve the mystery because he witnessed a murder and was almost killed by the same bomb that killed the victim. He felt like it was his civic duty to bring the murderer to justice. But in this game, however, his motivation was that his company insured this painting, and he needed to find it or else he'll lose his job. I'll admit, this might seem a bit more realistic, but this isn't the George that we grew to love. The George I know would want to solve this murder for the sake of Henri, the victim. Not for the sake of a rich insurer who's too greedy to pay off the insurance money. In fact, I had a lot of issues with George in general during this game. Now, George was never the model of an upstanding citizen. He stole stuff, conned people out of their money, and had no qualms whatsoever over lying to get what he wanted. Sure, the ends justify the means, but there's no denying that his morals were dodgy at best. However, what he did in this game certainly takes the cake. Bit of a spoiler, so if it bothers you, skip to this part. However, I assure you that it's just a minor plot point. George needs to get into Henri's safe in his office, but the key is with Henri's wife, Bijou. Since his death, Bijou was distraught and could barely believe that her husband was gone. It was clear that she truly loved him. Whilst drunk, she talks about how she wishes she could dance with Henri to their favorite song once more. So George disguises himself as Henri, dances with her, and tricks her into giving him her husband's key. What makes this even worse is that this was a pretty sad and powerful scene. You can clearly see how happy she was to see her husband again. It was such a heartbreaking moment, made even more heartbreaking when you were reminded that this isn't even Henri. You're already on thin ice for what you did to Bassam's sign, George. I mean, honestly, the one Arabic character in the entire game asks you to name his shop and you name it Aladdin. The hell is wrong with you? I also didn't like how fan-servicey the game can get. I understand 1 or 2 characters from previous games making an appearance in this one, but 6 characters? This felt less like a creative choice and more like the devs going, "See, this is a Broken Sword game, I swear!" Granted, most of them weren't out of place per se. I mean, it makes sense for Lane, a well-known art critic, to be at an art gallery in Paris. And it makes sense for Fleur, the flower lady from the first game, to still be Nico's neighbor. Not to mention, her inclusion finally made this a true statement.
See you later.
That's right, monsieur. You will.
But I feel like the inclusion of Lady Piermont was a bit too much. And why is Moo a sergeant again? Wasn't he promoted to inspector in Broken Sword 2?
Did I hear you refer to Inspector Moo?
Yes, you remember him?
You could have easily just written a new sergeant, Revolution. You didn't have to demote this poor man for the sake of fan service. On the bright side, I'm happy that the Hendersons are back. Their inclusion in this game makes it a complete Broken Sword experience. I also love how George is acting like Broken Sword 4 never happened.
What have you been up to since we last met in Claramonte?
I'm right with you there, George. I'm right with you. Other than that, it was a very good story, and I genuinely loved it. I also really liked the characters. While some of them were a bit too cartoony, most of them were pretty interesting and quite memorable. Sadly, the same can't be said about the writing. Although the game had its fair share of good lines...
Senor, please! Whoever you are, hold your fire! I'm not armed!
Good. That makes it easier for me to shoot you.
and some of the jokes were pretty funny.
You've solved a lot of crimes, I guess.
More than you have had hot dinners?
Well, I've had a lot of hot dinners, Inspector.
Oh, yes? How many?
What?
Precisely how many hot dinners have you had, monsieur?
I feel like the writing was subpar when compared to other games in the series, especially the first episode.
Lady Piermont, Mr. Hobbs won't let me turn up the heating.
Well, we'll soon see about that.
Oh, crows.
If you do not adjust the heating, I shall refuse to cooperate.
He isn't Merlin.
A mere academic detail. Give him the package.
But that is against the law.
I happen to be a justice of the peace, you silly man. I am the law. If he tries anything, shoot him, George.
My pleasure, Lady Piermont.
It wasn't as shallow as the writing in Broken Sword 2, but it wasn't that much better either.
I found a slice of pizza.
I asked for food, boy, not a cardboard simulacrum.
Oh, okay, if you don't want it.
I didn't say that. Now give it here.
A lot of the jokes were very cheesy, and the writing in general was quite cringe. Sometimes it was downright lazy.
I believe your company set up the security.
Oh, no, we didn't.
Oh, yes, you did.
Didn't.
Did.
I've got all day.
But I didn't.
This was especially noticeable during conversations. Much like in Broken Sword 1, you can talk to NPCs about every item in your inventory. However, only a few of them give you any entertaining or interesting dialogue. The rest either give you a generic line such as this one,
That's lovely, dear.
or George flat out refuses to even show the item to the NPC.
I didn't think she'd like that. She wouldn't be impressed. I didn't think she'd like that. I didn't think she'd like that. I didn't think she'd like that.
And even when the item results in a few lines of dialogue, it's usually quite dull.
Smell this!
Ooh. At least it's the real thing.
Thankfully though, it does get a lot better in the second episode. However, it still wasn't great.
So, what's the answer? Where's the tabula?
I don't know. The room has changed.
Was there something different about the room back then?
No. Yes. I don't know. You must help me.
I guess I just have to accept that this series will never have writing as good as that of Broken Sword 1.
As I picked myself up, all I could hear was the ceaseless drone of traffic. Life went on around me. But the explosion was to change my life forever.
The gallery owner was dead. I guess sometimes playing the hero doesn't pay. My company had insured the exhibition, so I had a crime to solve.
The voice acting was fine. None of the performances stood out to me as good, however, none of them stood out as bad either.
I know this sounds obvious, but are you sure it's plugged in?
Monsieur Stobart, do you really think I would be so stupid as to not check the fundamentals?
We all make mistakes.
What a ridiculous generalization, monsieur. Look, I can see from here it's... Ah.
Though I wasn't a fan of Sergeant Moo's new voice.
I am sorry, but I am under strict orders from Inspector Navet. Nobody in, nobody out.
It wasn't bad or anything, but it didn't quite fit his character. He's supposed to be this hard-headed yet simple gendarme.
We'll know everything there is to know about him soon enough.
I'm trying to be helpful here.
The best way you can help us is to go home, monsieur.
But in this game, he sounded more like a sweet old uncle who gives you the cookies your mom told you not to eat until you've had your dinner.
Well, since you seem quite understanding, I shall elaborate.
The voice of Nico was done by Emma Tate, who did an okay job as Nico.
This one was rejected. George got in the way. Typical.
Who is this George?
Just a friend. He ensured the painting.
Still not as good as Hazel Ellerby, but I think her voice was a huge improvement over previous Nicos.
What do you know about the owner of La Malédiction?
That was Henri's business. He found the painting and did the deal with the owner.
Would anybody else know anything about the owner?
Apparently, Revolution wanted to get back Ellerby to voice both Nico and Lady Piermont, but due to scheduling issues, Ellerby wasn't able to join this project. Which is a shame because I still believe she was the best Nico thus far.
Who's the guy you were supposed to meet?
His name was Planter. I didn't know him, but he called me last night. He said he had a story which would interest me. He asked me to meet him at the cafe. I guess I'll never know what he wanted to tell me.
And because this is the first time Lady Piermont was voiced by someone else, I can say that Ellerby was the best Lady Piermont as well.
I'll give him something to be scared of. Follow me, George!
Rolf Saxon as George was as good as usual. Nothing really stood out for me, except for this line.
Hey, goat. Want a fig?
Why is he saying it this way? It's so creepy.
Want a fig?
The late Barrington Phelan came back to compose the music of this game, and it shows. Because of his music, Broken Sword 5 definitely sounds like Broken Sword.
The gallery, but a familiar figure was guarding the door. It was Sergeant Moo. Our paths had crossed before.
Sadly, I can't think of a single track that stood out for me. Most of the music in this game felt more like background music rather than actual music tracks. As in, it went well with what was happening on screen, but it wasn't the type of music you could listen to on its own.
Come here, little fella. I was never going to catch it with my bare hands. There were crumbs on the floor. No wonder the cockroach was sticking around.
In the southwest. And now I want the painting back.
Did you lose all your family in the Civil War?
When they came for us in 38, I fled with my mother. But my father was not so lucky.
Fair enough, I mean, it is meant to be background music after all, and he definitely did a great job as usual.
The stolen painting had an alarm, which should have sounded when the painting was removed. I needed to find out why it hadn't.
But I wish there was at least one track I could point to and say, this is Broken Sword 5. But hey, at least the original Broken Sword theme is back, and I'm genuinely happy about that. As for the visuals, they're a mixed bag. On the one hand, the backgrounds are gorgeous. The colors, the design, the attention to detail, it's all so beautiful. I wouldn't say they were painting to hang on the wall level of beautiful like in Broken Sword 1, but they were much more appealing than the backgrounds in Broken Sword 2, and a lot easier on the eye than the backgrounds of Broken Sword 3 and 4. Almost every scene in this game was a joy to look at. I'm also very happy that they included the option to play the game with the colorful classic speech from Broken Sword 1 and 2, instead of the ugly, uninspired speech bubbles of Director's Cut. On the other hand, I truly hated the character models. Not only are they bland and soulless, but they also look very cheap when compared to the 2D sprites of Broken Sword 1 and 2. Granted, I'd still take these over the awful 3D models of Broken Sword 4, but I definitely wasn't a fan. I really dislike how George looks in this game. I love how in this part, Nico isn't even looking at Nave whilst talking to him. Also, is it just me, or does Eva looking forward look nothing like Eva looking at Nico? The animations are also a huge step down from the gorgeous animations of the first two games. They're not necessarily bad, and a lot of them are fine, but none of them compare to this, or this, or this. Of course, they're a huge improvement over the animations of Broken Sword 3 and 4, but that's not saying much, is it? This game should have been a return to form, but when it comes to animations, it really isn't. Plus, they're quite flawed. There are parts where a character takes an item out of the scene, but the item stays within the scene until the animation is over, and vice versa. To be fair, I understand why they went with this art style rather than the original hand-drawn sprites of the first two games. Hand-drawn sprites take time which Revolution probably couldn't afford. I just hope they will consider this for their next oh wait, never mind. So far, I'm liking what I see. The story is really good and the backgrounds are gorgeous. Though the writing can be a bit subpar and the animations leave a lot to be desired, this still feels like a Broken Sword game. A good one at that. But what about the gameplay? As usual, we'll talk about the mechanics first, then the puzzles. I'm so happy to say that as far as mechanics go, this is a true return to form. The game plays almost exactly like Broken Sword 1 and 2. No keyboard controls, no platforming, no stealth, no QTEs. You click on something, then something happens. It's even made more like the originals with the option to switch the UI to classic instead of modern, giving you the same exact UI of Broken Sword 2, with all the inventory items tucked neatly at the bottom of the screen. I guess you could just keep playing the game with the modern UI, but why would you? The classic icons are back. However, I am quite disappointed to see that they went with the awkwardly animated ones from the Director's Cut rather than the vastly superior ones from Broken Sword 1 and 2. To those who have watched my review of Broken Sword 1, or to those who have played it, you already know what to expect. Right-clicking on a hotspot would examine it, and left-clicking on a hotspot would take the action assigned to said hotspot. The gears icon means you can operate the hotspot. The eye icon means you can only inspect the hotspot. The mouth icon means you can speak to the hotspot. The hand picking up icon means that the hotspot is pick-upable. And the hand pointing icon means you can go to the area it's pointing at. It also replaced the beckoning icon from Broken Sword 1. However, it's pretty broken. See, this icon is meant to beckon George or Nico to the other side of the screen, but it doesn't work. Instead, you just walk to the point you clicked on. And sometimes it's not even there, it's so useless. Speaking of useless, the game is as open as the first Broken Sword, where you can choose where to go on a map of the city. However, it's absolutely pointless, as you can only move between 4 places, and only in the first episode. The second episode is completely linear. And remember how in Broken Sword 1 you can go to the airport and choose to travel to another country? None of that here, as you automatically travel to the country you need to travel to once the game decides you have to go there. Honestly, I wouldn't have minded if this game was fully linear, just like Broken Sword 2. Much like in Broken Sword 1, the devs didn't do much with the non-linear design. So this openness was truly pointless, and the game just didn't need it. Another returning feature from Broken Sword 1 is the conversation choices, such as when you get the chance to lie or tell the truth. In Broken Sword 1, these choices usually resulted in entire conversations changing.
Can you remember anything at all?
No. I need a drink. Pour me a brandy.
You could be in shock. No alcohol.
Is the girl all right, Moo? She'll live. She confirms the American statement. A clown with an accordion, no doubt an elaborate and eccentric disguise.
Very well. Can you remember anything at all?
No. I need a drink. Pour me a brandy.
Is that straight or with ice?
Is the girl all right, Moo? She'll live if she survives the hangover. She doesn't remember seeing a clown, monsieur.
That's odd, don't you think, monsieur? Who am I to believe, I wonder?
They could even change a character's opinion of you and the way they treat you.
What's your interest in the jewel? You're not a reporter, are you?
Oh no.
Thank the Lord for that.
How can I get into the castle?
Well, those walls were built specifically to stop people getting in, Mr. Stobart. But I dare say you'll find a way, if you've the will.
Why is Peagram's departure upset the landlord?
He's lost a paying guest, that's why. More than that, there's the question of an unsettled bill.
Goodbye for now.
What's your interest in the jewel? You're not a reporter, are you?
Yes, that's right.
And not a bloody news hound. Well, you're wasting your time here, boy. You'll find the people of Lochmarn are a tight-lipped and cautious lot.
How can I get into the castle?
Listen, it's closed, locked, barred, and bolted. The castle is as impenetrable as the walls of Troy.
So I can't get in then?
My, you're bright for a journalist.
Why is Peagram's departure upset the landlord?
Well, why don't you ask him yourself, Mr. Ace Reporter?
Goodbye for now.
Good riddance to you.
And sometimes they even resulted in death.
Oh man, you're gonna kill me?
Your only choice now is whether you die like a man or like a dog.
Hey, look now, don't kill me. I've got money. Maybe we can cut a deal.
You disappoint me.
In this game, however, none of your choices matter. All your choice does is change the character's reply.
I wasn't tampering with anything. I was just looking for clues. That is my job, monsieur. I'm just looking for the name of the caterer. That cheese was to die for. Ah, to die for? To kill for. I put it to you, monsieur.
And sometimes not even that.
But something did happen, Hobbs. Your friend lost his life.
Look, I'll help you however I can, but this mess is way above my pay grade.
We're not accusing you of anything, Mr. Hobbs. We just want to get to the bottom of this.
I get that, and I'll help you however I can, but this mess is way above my pay grade.
Even ones that seem very important, which I won't spoil, turn out to be completely pointless. Look, I realize that this entire part of my review has been very nitpicky. I mean, Broken Sword 2 had 0 choices and was completely linear, yet I still loved it. My issue here is that what little we had in Broken Sword 1 became even less here. If these 2 mechanics weren't there, I wouldn't have missed them. But because they were there, I felt disappointed that they weren't utilized properly. This is supposed to be Revolution's vision. Their huge love project, which is the result of them breaking away from the restraints of publishing companies. So to see them squander 2 very promising mechanics like this just makes me sad. There aren't even death instances in this game. Personally, I'm not a huge fan of deaths in point-and-click adventures, but when done right, they could be used to keep the player on their toes, and Broken Sword usually does it right. So I feel kinda uneasy that they removed deaths entirely. Anyway, it's not a huge deal. At the end of the day, I'd rather the developers put their efforts into making good puzzles instead of making the player die because they pushed a rock the wrong way. Speaking of puzzles, there are two types in this game. The first is your basic point-and-click adventure stuff, such as inventory-based puzzles and logic-based puzzles. And the second is literal puzzles. More on those later. The inventory-based puzzles were pretty good. They didn't always make sense, but much like in Broken Sword 2, at least they were fun to solve, and didn't leave you stabbing in the dark. Some of them were a bit too easy, such as getting Moo a coffee to make him want to use the bathroom, but some were quite complex and fun to figure out, such as this one where you have to find a more creative way to make Moo want to use the bathroom. There's this one where you need to look through Hobbs's portfolio, but he won't let you. You find out that he gets really annoyed if you touch the thermostat or use the elevator, as the power in the building is unreliable. So now you know that in order to get him out of the way, you need to trip the breaker so the power goes off. Turning on the radio, increasing the temperature, and using the lift are almost enough to do it, but not quite. So you ask Lady Piermont to help you by standing on the lift to put more stress on it, and her help does the trick. However, the time he needs to turn the power back on isn't nearly enough for you to check his portfolio, so you need to do one more thing. Throughout your efforts, you'll notice that he takes a sip of his drink every time he gets annoyed. So maybe you can give him a little push by topping his glass off and annoying him some more. After a few more sips, he becomes properly drunk, and will take a much longer time to turn the power back on. More than enough time for you to check his portfolio. There's a good amount of puzzles in this game that are as fun to solve as this one. However, there were some that were a bit of a stretch. They weren't bad per se, but they weren't as clear as this one. For example, I wasn't a huge fan of the cockroach puzzle. You need to fix this suspension cart console by connecting the two prongs inside it. You have this paperclip which could work, but unfortunately you can't get to the prongs to attach it. So you need the help of your pet cockroach, Trevor. You need to attach the paperclip to Trevor's back, but you can't just place it on his back because it will just fall. So you need something to make it stick. And this was my biggest issue with this puzzle. The only thing you can use was the strawberry jam on the cogs you used a few moments ago. If you haven't noticed the strawberry jam coming out of the lunchbox you used the cogs to open, it'll be very easy to miss this solution. Not to mention, strawberry jam isn't as sticky as the devs think it is. Wouldn't it have made more sense if you could use chewed up gum instead? Another puzzle I consider a stretch was this one, where you had to find a way to open the skylight since the mechanism is broken. The only way to do this is to drop a breath mint into a bottle of Diet Coke. Then point the agitated bottle at the skyline and unleash it to open said skyline. The only reason I was able to solve this puzzle so fast was because the game gave me breath mints and a bottle of Diet Coke. I just had to do it. As for the logic puzzles, I enjoyed most of them. Some of them were pretty easy, such as trying to figure out the code for Henri's security camera system, whilst others needed some actual critical thinking, such as figuring out where Ramon hid the library key. The second type of puzzles are the literal puzzles, as in puzzles that could work without the game's context. These were the ones where Revolution had to step in and tell you what you need to do. There were a total of 6 of these puzzles. One of them was great, one was alright, 2 were pretty meh, and 2 were really bad. The one where you had to come up with a name for Bassam's shop, and the one where you had to fix Inspector Nave's machine were pretty boring. So I won't waste time on them, as the devs clearly didn't spend time on coming up with them. The best puzzle was the one where you had to decipher what was written on this ancient tablet. This was such a good puzzle, as you had to figure out these words using what you know about this language from a different, already translated tablet. I'm sure a lot more goes into deciphering pictographic languages, but this puzzle truly made me feel like I was an actual archaeologist or linguist uncovering the meaning of these symbols. This puzzle was so much fun that I will blur out the answers just so I wouldn't ruin it for you. The puzzle that I thought was fine was the one where you had to use La Malediccio to figure out the location of this game's MacGuffin. It was a pretty neat idea, but I feel like they didn't do much with it. In order to solve it, you need to figure out the locations that are drawn within these rings. You figure out the first one by studying this fresco, the second one by inspecting these shields after solving a specific puzzle related to said fresco, and the third by talking to Nico about it. Figuring those out wasn't really challenging, but it was a neat idea nonetheless. Figuring out the fourth location required a bit of critical thinking. However, it also needed you to solve another one of these literal puzzles, and it's one I genuinely hated. Basically, you have to decode this telegram. Look, Revolution. These decoding puzzles are never fun. You tried them out in Director's Cut, and I hated them back then as well. They're not challenging, and they rely solely on trial and error. They're just busy work, and I hate them. But the one I disliked the most was this one, where you had to rearrange a torn-up letter. I hated this one for multiple reasons. First off, the way you had to start it. You break into this office and find a paper halfway through a shredder. It seems that the shredder is jammed, and you can't pull out the paper, so you have to fix the machine first. In order to do so, you need to oil its cogs. There's a splotch of oil on the floor, and the only way to pick it up is to use this Q-tip that you found in this drawer. Problem is, when you searched this drawer earlier that day, it was completely empty, so why on earth would you think of searching it again? My second issue is that the puzzle makes absolutely no sense. You see, the paper is supposed to be shredded, but does this seem like a shredded paper to you? To me, this looks like it was neatly torn apart. Almost as if the person who tore it apart wanted George to rearrange it. And the third reason I hated this puzzle, which is the icing on the cake, is that the puzzle isn't even fun. It's dull, it's boring, and it's very easy. It's also quite awkward to handle, as sometimes you'll drop a piece over another piece without noticing, and the game doesn't give you any indicator that there are two pieces on top of each other. I already dislike jigsaw puzzles, but at least they're usually more challenging than this. I just wish this puzzle didn't exist. And once again, this was already a puzzle they attempted in the Director's Cut. Look, Revolution. Stop using that game as inspiration. Everyone hated it. It was awful. Please. You're better than this. Let's move on and forget about that mess. I beg you. Also, what is it with you and save slots? Broken Sword 1 had 232 save slots. Broken Sword 2 had 99. Then Broken Sword 3 went down to 18 slots. Then Broken Sword 4 got 15. Then the Director's Cut got 10. And now Broken Sword 5 has only 8 slots? I don't get it. Why do you hate save slots so much? Anyway, that's Broken Sword 5, The Serpent's Curse. Despite my issues with it, I am so happy that this game exists. I still think that 1 and 2 were better games, however, I genuinely believe that this was a true return to form. And if they learn from the mistakes they made in this one, I imagine a Broken Sword 6 would be amazing. I highly enjoyed my time with this game, and I think its story was quite good. I would easily recommend it to both fans of the series and fans of the genre in general. The best part about it is that newcomers don't need to worry about playing the previous games, as this one stands on its own quite well. If you can get over the janky animations and the cheesy writing, you'll find yourself playing a very good adventure game. And that's that! This was the final game in my Revolution Software retrospective. Sure, I still have Beyond the Steel Sky to review, but that game came out recently, so it's hardly a retrospective. I will be reviewing it though, so don't worry. I cannot thank you enough for watching this series. I couldn't have made these videos if it weren't for your kind words and constructive feedback. Thank you so much to everyone who has watched it, and I hope you'll stick around to see what's up next on this channel. If you liked this video, consider giving it a thumbs up. And whilst you're at it, make sure you click that subscribe button. Hitting the bell icon wouldn't hurt either. If you enjoy what I do and you want to support this channel, then consider subscribing to my Patreon, or donating to mycoffee.com. That's all for this video, and that's all for this series. Join me next time as we take a look at Beyond the Steel Sky, and see the damage done to my favorite point-and-click adventure. That's all for today. Thank you for watching.